Clutching the Coke bottle by the neck in one hand and the paper plate in the other, Omri sneaked back upstairs with a fast-beating heart. All was just as he had left it, except that the Indian was sitting on the edge of the shelf, dangling his legs and trying to sharpen his knife on the metal. He jumped up as soon as he saw Omri. "Food?" he asked eagerly. "Yes, but I don't know if it's what you like." "I like. Give, quick." But Omri wanted to arrange things a little. He took a pair of scissors and cut a small circle out of the paper plate. On this he put a crumb of bread, another of cheese, and one kernel of the sweet corn. He handed this offering to the Indian, who backed off, looking at the food with hungry eyes, but trying to keep watch on Omri at the same time. "Not touch. You touch, I use knife," he warned. "All right, I promise not to. Now you can eat." Very cautiously the Indian sat down, this time cross-legged on the shelf. At first he tried to eat with his left hand, keeping the knife at the ready in his right, but he was so hungry he soon abandoned this effort, laid the knife close at his side, grabbing the bread in one hand and the little crumb of cheese in the other. He began to tear at them ravenously. When the two apparently familiar foods had taken the edge off his appetite, he turned his attention to the single kernel of corn. "What?" he asked suspiciously. "Corn, like you have." Omri hesitated. "Where you come from," he said. It was a shot in the dark. He didn't know if the Indian came from anywhere, but he meant to find out. The Indian grunted, turning the corn about in both hands, for it was half as big as his head. He smelled it. A great grin spread over his face. He nibbled it. The grin grew wider. But then he held it away and looked again, and his grin vanished. "Too big," he said. "Like you," he added accusingly. "Eat it. It's the same stuff." The Indian took a bite. He still looked very suspicious, but he ate and he ate. He couldn't finish it, but he evidently liked it. "Give meat," he said finally. "I'm sorry, I can't find any tonight, but I'll get you some tomorrow," said Omri. After another grunt, the Indian said, "Drink." Omri had been waiting for this. From the box where he kept his Action Man things, he brought out a plastic mug. It was much too big for the Indian, but it was the best he could do. Into it, with extreme care, he now poured a minute amount of Coke from the huge bottle. He handed it to the Indian, who had to hold it with both hands, and still he almost dropped it. "Coca-Cola," said Omri enthusiastically, pouring some for himself into a cup. "Fire water?" "No, it's cold, but you'll like it." The Indian sipped, swallowed, gulped. He gulped again, and he grinned. "Good?" asked Omri. "Good," said the Indian. "Cheers," said Omri, raising his cup as he had seen his parents do. "What cheers?" "I don't know," said Omri, feeling excessively happy, and he drank. His Indian, eating and drinking. He was real, a real flesh and blood person. It was too marvelous. Omri felt like he might die of delight. "Do you feel better now?" he asked. "I better. You not better," said the Indian. "You still big. You stop eat. Get right size." Omri laughed out loud, and then he stopped himself. "It's time to sleep," he said. "Not now. Big light. Sleep when light go out." "I can make the light go out," said Omri, and he switched out his bedside lamp. In the darkness came a thin cry of astonishment and fear. Omri switched the light back on again. The Indian was now gazing at him with something more than respect, a sort of awe. "You great white spirit?" he asked. "No," said Omri, "and this isn't the sun. It's a lamp. Don't you have lamps?" The Indian peered where he was pointing. "That lamp?" he asked. "Much big lamp. Need much oil." "But this isn't an oil lamp. It works with electricity." "Magic?" "No, electricity. But speaking of magic, how did you get here?" The Indian looked at him steadily out of his black eyes. "You not know?" "No, I don't. You were a toy. Then I put you in my cupboard and I locked the door. When I opened it, you were real. Then I locked it again, and you went back to being plastic. Then he stopped himself. Wait, what if? He thought furiously. It was possible, in which case, listen, he said, I want you to come out of there. I'll find you a much more comfortable place. You said you were cold. I'll make you a proper teepee. Teepee? The Indian shouted. I no live teepee. I live longhouse. Omri was so eager to test his theory about the cupboard that he got impatient. You'll have to make do with a teepee, he said. Hastily, he opened a drawer and took out a biscuit tin full of little plastic people. Somewhere in here was a plastic teepee. Ah, here! He pounced on it. A small, pinkish, cone-shaped object with designs rather badly painted on its plastic sides. Will this do? He put it on the shelf beside the Indian, who looked at it with the utmost scorn. This teepee? He said. He touched its plastic side and made a face. He pushed it with both hands. It slid along the shelf. He bent and he peered in through the triangular opening. Then he actually spat on the ground, or rather on the shelf. Oh, said Omri. You mean it's not good enough? Not want toy, said the Indian, and he turned his back, folding both of his arms across his chest with an air of finality. Omri saw his chance. With one quick movement, he had picked up the Indian by the waist between his thumb and forefinger. In doing this, he pinned the knife, which was in the Indian's belt, firmly to his side. The dangling Indian twisted. He writhed. He kicked. He made a number of ferocious and hideous faces. But beyond that, he was helpless, and he knew it. For after a few moments, he decided it was more dignified to stop struggling. Instead, he folded his tiny arms across his chest once more. He put his head back, and he stared with proud defiance at Omri's face, which was now level with his own. For Omri, the feeling of holding this little creature in his fingers was very strange and wonderful. If he had any doubts that the Indian was truly alive, the sensation he had would now have put them to rest. His body was heavier now. It was warm and firm and full of life. Through Omri's thumb on the Indian's left side, he could feel his heart beating wildly like a bird's. Although the Indian felt strong, Omri could sense how fragile he was, how easily an extra squeeze could injure him. Would have liked to feel him, his tiny arms, his legs, his hair, his ears, almost too small to see. Yet when he saw the Indian, who was altogether in his power, faced him boldly and hid his fear, he lost all desire to handle him. He felt it was cruel and insulting to the Indian, who was no longer his plaything, but a person who had to be respected. Omri put him down gently on the chest of drawers where the cupboard stood. Then he crouched down till his face was level with the Indian's. I'm sorry I did that, he said. The Indian was breathing heavily, and his arms were still folded. He said nothing, but he stared haughtily at Omri, as if nothing he did could affect him in any way. What's your name? Asked Omri. Little Bear, said the Indian, pointing proudly to himself. Iroquois brave, son of chief. You son of chief? He said. No, said Omri. Humph, said Little Bear with a superior look. Name? Omri told him. Now we must find you another place to sleep, outside the cupboard. Surely you sleep in teepees sometimes. Never, said Little Bear firmly. Never heard of an Indian who didn't, said Omri. You'll have to tonight anyway. Not toy, said the Indian. This no good. And fire. I want fire. Can't light a fire in here, but I'll make you a teepee. It won't be very good, but I promise you a better one tomorrow. He looked around. It was good, he thought, that he never put anything away. Everything he needed was strewn about on his floor and on tables and shelves, ready for his hands. Starting with some pickup sticks and a little bit of string, he made a cone shape. He tied it at the top. Around this, he draped first a handkerchief, and then, that didn't seem firm enough, he took a bit of old felt from a hat that had been in his dressing-up crate. It was fawn-colored, fortunately, and it looked just like an animal hide. In fact, when it was pinned together at the back with safety pins and a slit for an entrance, the whole thing looked pretty good, especially with the poles sticking up through the hole in the top. Omri stood it up carefully on the chest of drawers and anxiously awaited Little Bear's verdict. The Indian walked around it 3 times, very slowly. He went down on his hands and knees, and he crawled in through the flap. He came out again after a minute. He tugged at the felt, and he stood back to look at the poles. And finally, he gave a fairly satisfied grunt. However, he wasn't going to pass it without any criticism at all. "No pictures," he said. "If teepee, then need pictures." "I don't know how to do them," said Omri. "I know. You give colors. I make." "Tomorrow," said Omri, who despite himself was beginning to feel very sleepy. "Blanket?" Omri fished out one of the Action Man's sleeping bags. "No good. No keep out wind." Omri started to tell him that there was no wind in his bedroom, but then he decided it was easier to cut up a square out of one of his old sweaters. So he did that. It was a red one with a stripe around the bottom, and even Little Bear couldn't hide his approval as he held it up. Then he wrapped himself with it. "Good, warm. I sleep now." He dropped on his knees and he crawled into the tent. After a moment, he stuck his head out. "Tomorrow, talk. You give Little Bear meat, fire, color, much things." He scowled at Omri. "Good?" "Good," said Omri, and indeed nothing in his life had ever promised better.